Miscarriages of justice lead to ruined lives. Families are destroyed. Jobs and homes are lost, and people's reputation are left in tatters. The mental despair and anguish caused is never fully resolved. People's lives can never go back to how they were, but this is where we find, as a decent society, that we have to make amends.
Back in, 1974, I was 13, enjoying life. I was happy being a child. The police came to our house and raided it on the strength of 4 people that had been arrested for the Guildford pub bombings. I never knew Guildford. I never knew about the pub bombings at all. But I said, well, you've made a mistake there. And I remember just crying my eyes out and obviously wishing that this was all over. And eventually it does end.
So we're campaigning about the compensation scheme for miscarriage of justice victims, which is a brutal scheme because of a test that came in 2014. It was a test that was snuck in to a big act, and there were some people raising a voice about this is going to have a devastating effect.
Now we see the onus on victims of miscarriages of justice to prove that they didn't do what the state is saying that they did. This is obviously manifestly unfair.
They should never have been prosecuted in the first place in these miscarriage of justice cases. So it's completely wrong that the state does not compensate them unless they can discharge a burden that should never have been on them in the first place.
It is dropped through the floor. We have had a couple of years since 2014 where nobody got compensation in this country. And the worst part of it all is that people who have spent many years in prison for offences which they did not commit are left destitute without a single penny.
My son went to prison for 13 years and a half, and his conviction was quashed. Then he left out without compensation. So this feels like he is left out completely, and he is very sad.
And they will think they have been wrongly done over, not once by the conviction, but twice by the grudging attitude of the state, saying, well, there may be technicalities, but, and they're saying it by implication, you probably did it anyway.
One of the many victims of this new test was Sam Hallam, whose conviction was quashed in 2012. The prosecution dropped their opposition to that appeal. The police made a very public apology to Sam Hallam and said there were lessons to be learnt. And yet he hasn't been provided with compensation, not a single penny. Even when the system has admitted it's got it wrong, we're not providing compensation to people.
You are innocent until you are proven guilty. If the state has proven you guilty by dishonest or inadequate or wrong means, you shouldn't then have to prove your own innocence, because you should never have been convicted in the first place. And if you shouldn't have been convicted in the first place, you must be entitled to the presumption of innocence.
I went to prison for 17 years for something I did not do. I was wrongfully convicted. I have received no compensation from the government. I have suffered greatly in many ways, mainly in my mental health and everyday life. I've also suffered the loss of my family. My mother passed away while I was in prison, and my father passed away a few months after I had been acquitted.
They're left with a feeling that somehow they did something wrong, whereas really what should be happening is they should be getting immediate interim compensation and then proper compensation thereafter.
In December 2008, the legal battle started because I pleaded not guilty, and then in 2010, jury came back with the verdict guilty. And on my eldest and 10th birthday, and being 8 weeks pregnant, I was sentenced to 15-month imprisonment. When I was on tag, I was told if I break my curfew, if I do anything wrong, they put me back in the prison straight away. And I told them, like I'm pregnant. I was hoping that I go to labor during non-curfew hour. And I was scared that I broke my curfew. So there will be van waiting for me to take me back in the prison. And while giving birth, I was thinking, oh my God, what midwife be thinking, what kind of mother I'm going to be. And like, if I can be sent to the prison, anything is possible.
In this country, compensation for victims of miscarriage of justice is incredibly difficult to get. The legal test, it's almost impossible to meet. If you're looking at it from a cost savings perspective, which I know governments like to do, the amount of money that we're talking about is absolutely minuscule in terms of the MOJ budget. And so what we're calling for is a reform which reverses that position.
There should be no questions about this. You shouldn't have to go through another test or anything else. It's just another insult to what's happened to you at the beginning, like the Sam Hallam. And I said to Sam, just remember this, mate, your greatest strength that no one can ever take away from you is knowing you've never done it. It's hard work, this campaigning. To be guilty is easier.
For 20 years, the whole of my young adult life, I've been fighting a murder case of which I'm entirely innocent. Still today, I've not received a single penny for the 7.5 years I spent in prison. The brutal test for compensation introduced in 2014 needs to be abolished. It goes completely against what this country should stand for.
And we should be looking after these people. We should be providing psychological support. We should be doing more for them, not leaving them with no proper support from society. So what we're calling for is to scrap the test that came in 2014, because it is an impossible burden to place on someone that they have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that they are innocent.
Compensation schemes are torture. We went through torture, went through trauma, and then we have to go and explain it, which is not right. Mentally, or I think as a state, as ethical value, it's nowhere near. It should be simple, straightforward, and it shouldn't be delayed as well.
For if Mr. Buckle is, in law, presumed to be innocent, then he must be treated by the state as such. A man presumed to be innocent who has spent over 5 years in jail should be compensated. And if the state wants to treat him as though he were a guilty man and deny him that compensation, why should the burden not fall onto the state to prove his guilt? It's clearly an affront to justice that the eligibility test prevents those who have been wrongly convicted of enjoying the full and unconditional benefits of being presumed innocent.
At the European Court of Human Rights, 5 senior judges said that we have a test in this country that makes compensation virtually insurmountable. And all of the judges said that there was a moral duty on the UK to have a proper compensation scheme. And so we need to wake up to that. We're out of sync with other countries in how they deal with this issue.
To ask people to prove their innocence beyond reasonable doubt is actually an affront to our system of law. It flies in the face of one of our key legal principles, which acknowledges that it's very difficult for people to prove their innocence. It's very difficult for people to prove that they are innocent beyond reasonable doubt. Prove that you didn't do it. Prove that you didn't kill your baby. Prove that you didn't leave a bomb in the pub.
You should start from the proposition that where there is a miscarriage of justice, which means that material has been withheld or doctored or not properly examined, then you should be compensated because you weren't properly convicted in the first place. You are entitled to the presumption of innocence. I am strongly in favour of changing the law because I think that's the right and just result, particularly in the context of the presumption of innocence.
We have situations where these big issues happen and the government, instead of having a systemic, consistent, principled way of handling these cases, they operate on a case-by-case basis. And that's obviously unfair for victims. And that's also as well not a good way of running policy. You need to have a consistent statutory approach to dealing with this. Now obviously compensation isn't going to undo all of the harm of false imprisonment, of the imprisonment they shouldn't have suffered, but it's a meaningful step to making sure that they have the ability to rebuild their lives.
I was in prison for something I didn't do for 11 years. I have not received a penny from what happened to me. It makes me very angry, and I've lost lots of years going through that experience.
It's the next generation you got to look at, as I have done with my kids and grandkids now. I've learned to conduct myself in a way that's going to be a reflection on them. If you do wrong, you get punished. We all agree with that. That's part of life. But if you haven't done it and you've been punished, then you've got to look after them. You've got to look after people.
But it's also important that the state takes accountability, takes responsibility, and this sort of a sense of just walking away, we can wash our hands of this case, has a feeling that we don't care about you.
We've been working so hard, paying our taxes on time. Suddenly the scandal happened, or the miscarriage of justice happened. We lost everything, not just us, the whole family. Having it like legally overturned means a lot. But on top of that, the most important bit is accountability. See, if we let post office get away with it, tomorrow will be different organization doing the same. And as a society, I don't think we can afford that.
Now is the time for the government to really grapple with this issue. We've been waiting years and years. The work of Appeal and many other organisations and victims has really shone a light on this, from the post office scandal to Andrew Malkinson to Sam Howell and Victor Neelan themselves. It's a really simple fix that can be done by way of legislation. The solutions are there and are in hand. But we also as well can look at our European counterparts in other countries around the world which have systems which operate as we want them to do so. This isn't a novel or a very outlandish proposal. It's really common sense, really simple. All we need is the government to just grasp that and do it.
I think it is an easy test to change. I think in the Act of Parliament that covers this says that you only get compensated for a miscarriage of justice if you, the defendant, can establish that you are innocent beyond a reasonable doubt. I think where there is a miscarriage of justice of the sort that I've been talking about, you should be entitled to compensation unless the state can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that in fact you did it.
Faulty decisions can cost the state coffers, and so it's important that the state realises and takes accountability on that level, because if they're able to make these mistakes, sometimes these gross systemic mistakes, like in the case of the post office scandal, then you have a situation where there's no disincentive to actually fix those problems.
Yeah, it's been a long journey. And like I say, at the end of it, they give you a couple of quid. There's no point in me saying, give me back my life. But if that's all they can do is give you a £1 note, then they better give it to you. And give as much as they possibly can. You've locked someone up for a crime they never did. Just a pat on the back isn't good enough.